Have you ever caught yourself saying, how did I end up here again? Not in the same place, but in the same pattern. Different partner, same fight, different friend, same betrayal, different beginning, same ending. Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's where we begin. Because what we call fate in love often has more to do with psychology than with destiny. The people we attract and the ones we can't seem to leave are not random. They are mirrors of our inner world, characters in a story our unconscious keeps trying to finish. Jung believed that we are each born with a cast of inner figures, archetypes, that script how we love, fight, rescue, and abandon. These are not just symbols, they are living psychic forces, the anima and animus, our inner feminine and masculine, the parent and child, the trickster who sabotages just when things start to feel safe. These forces aren't abstract, they show up at dinner tables, in text arguments, in moments where we swear we're done and somehow aren't. What's fascinating, Jung said, is that we meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. When someone enters your world and immediately feels familiar, it's not because your souls met in another life, it's because your psyche recognizes its own reflection. The attraction feels magnetic because it's your unconscious seeking reunion with what it's lost or denied. But what begins as recognition can easily become repetition. Projection feels like destiny until it feels like a trap. So today, we're not talking about fixing relationships. We're talking about decoding them, about seeing the ancient psychology underneath our heartbreaks and patterns. This is about why you keep dating the unavailable one, why you're always the caretaker, why you love people who don't see you until you're gone. Jung would say that the soul arranges encounters so that we are forced to meet what we've avoided in ourselves. Every relationship is a kind of alchemical vessel. It either burns us or refines us. And this is why breaking the cycle isn't just about choosing better people, it's about knowing who's choosing for you. Because when your unconscious picks your partners, you're not in a relationship, you're in a repetition. Jung called this the compulsion to repeat. The psyche's drive to relive old conflicts until their meaning is integrated. It's not punishment, it's precision. The soul doesn't forget its unfinished business. So, in this exploration, we'll move through Jung's map of attraction, how the inner masculine and feminine shape our desires. We'll learn to recognize archetypal pairings like rescuer and victim, king and queen, trickster and fool. You'll see how the same drama rewrites itself under new names. And most importantly, how to reclaim the parts of yourself you've been projecting onto others. The power, the tenderness, the chaos, so that love becomes a conscious choice, not an ancient echo. Because Jung's message was never avoid the shadow, it was befriend it. The moment you recognize your inner cast, the anima who longs, the animus who seeks, the trickster who derails you, begin to step outside the loop. That's the first real freedom in love, when you stop repeating and start relating. When Jung spoke of love, he never described it as mere romance. He described it as psychological destiny. To him, attraction wasn't random, it was revelation. Every person who stirs something powerful in you is showing you a missing piece of your own soul. He called this magnetic inner polarity the anima and animus, the feminine soul image within a man and the masculine spirit image within a woman. But Jung was careful to say that these aren't about gender, they're about psychic energy. The anima is the side of us that feels, dreams, and connects. The animus is the side that acts, thinks, and defines. When these energies are undeveloped within us, we don't integrate them, we fall in love with them. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But if our inner opposite is immature or repressed, that transformation burns instead of refines. The person we call the One becomes the screen onto which our soul projects its unlived half. That's why someone can feel mystically familiar. It's not just chemistry. It's a collision between your conscious self and the image of your hidden self. The woman who seems ethereal and otherworldly might be the anima you've disowned, your feeling, intuitive side that you've buried beneath logic. The man who radiates certainty and power may be your animus, the inner strength you've yet to claim. At first, projection feels like fate. You look into their eyes and feel, I've known you forever. But Jung warned, when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. That means what you don't integrate, you'll meet and often you'll marry. The anima and animus don't just draw us to others, they also shape our conflicts. The very traits that enchant us at the beginning, confidence, warmth, intensity, are often the ones that later drive us away. Because once the projection begins to dissolve, we start to see the real person, and what's left behind is our own unlived potential. What was divine becomes human. And that disillusionment, Jung said, is the moment of truth. It's when love shifts from enchantment to consciousness. That's the turning point where most relationships falter. We feel the loss of the magic and assume love has died, when in fact, the projection has simply been withdrawn. Jung believed that true relationship only begins after this collapse, once you stop relating to your fantasy and start relating to the soul before you. But to get there, we must first recognize the pattern. Who do you keep falling for? What image keeps appearing in different forms? Jung would tell you to trace the feeling backward. Follow the thread of your attraction, not into your partner's story, but into your own dream life, your early longings, the parent you adored or the one you lost. Because every projection has roots in the original mirror, our first experiences of love and power. So before we can rewrite our patterns, we must see them. And to see them, we must name the myths they repeat. So let's make this personal. Imagine writing down your last 3 relationship conflicts, not just romantic, but anyone close enough to matter. Maybe it's a partner, a friend, or even a parent. Now read them side by side. The names and details change, but the myth often stays the same. One person withdraws, the other chases. One tries to rescue, the other resists. One feels unseen, the other feels blamed. And somewhere inside, a voice says, not again. Jung would tell you that what you're seeing isn't coincidence, it's constellation. When a psychological complex is activated, it pulls the same emotions, thoughts, and archetypes into orbit, like a planet's gravity. Each repetition is your psyche's attempt to resolve an old wound with new characters. But because the unconscious loves patterns more than progress, it keeps casting the same play. He once wrote, what we do not live consciously appears in our life as fate. So when you notice that you're reliving the same argument with different faces, it isn't failure, it's feedback. It's the psyche saying you still haven't seen the real story. To find that story, become an anthropologist of your own heart. Write those 3 conflicts down in brief scenes. Don't justify or explain, just describe. Then highlight the words that repeat always, never, again, every time. Those are the linguistic fossils of your myth. Maybe each story hides a fear of abandonment, or a hunger for control, or a resentment of invisibility. Beneath every recurring emotion is an archetype trying to speak. If you look closely, you'll find a pattern pair, what Jung might call the archetypal dyad. Every pattern is a dance between 2 unconscious roles, the rescuer and the victim, the king and the servant, the teacher and the rebel. These pairs magnetize each other because each is incomplete without the other. The rescuer feels alive only when saving someone fragile. The victim feels seen only when being saved. But as soon as one tries to grow, the other feels betrayed. The pattern breaks and then begins again with someone new. Jung would remind us that we are possessed by what we have not yet integrated. The pattern isn't you, it's a possession. And the moment you can name the archetypes at play, the spell starts to weaken. For example, if you realize you've been living as the parent to every partner, always responsible, always forgiving, then the next time you feel that impulse, you can pause and ask, who taught me that love must mean caretaking? That pause is sacred. Because once you name the archetype, you are no longer just in the story, you are observing it. You've shifted from participant to witness, from unconscious to conscious. Jung said that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents. When you identify your pattern, you're not just ending your own cycle, you're breaking a generational one. So before we move deeper into the archetypes themselves, the mother, the father, the hero, the trickster, take this moment to look at your pattern with compassion, not shame. The psyche repeats until it remembers, and remembering is how we heal. Now that you've seen the outlines of your pattern, we can enter Jung's inner theater, the world of archetypes. Jung described archetypes as the ancient patterns of the human soul, mythic blueprints that live within us all. They're not stories we tell, they're stories that live through us. Every person carries an internal pantheon, the nurturing mother, the commanding father, the brave hero, the yearning maiden, the trickster who breaks what's too rigid. The problem is not that we have them, but that one of them takes over. And when it does, it runs our relationships like an invisible director shouting from backstage. 1. The mother and father complexes. Jung once said, the greatest influence in the life of a man or woman is the image of the father or mother. These are the first gods we ever meet, and we spend much of adulthood trying to reconcile with their echoes. The mother archetype has many faces: the nurturer, the devourer, the martyr. In relationships, a person possessed by the mother may overgive, over-explain, over-function, believing love equals caretaking. Her red flag is fusion. She cannot stand to see others in pain because it activates her own fear of being unneeded. Her growth edge is separation, learning that love without rescue is still love. The father archetype governs structure, judgment, and authority. His light side is protection. His shadow is control. The father-possessed person might always need to be right, to direct, to provide answers even when no one asks. His red flag is certainty without empathy. His growth edge is humility, learning to guide without dominating, to hold strength without suppressing tenderness. 2. The hero and the maiden. The hero is the archetype of striving, the part of us that wants to conquer, achieve, and redeem. Jung called the hero's journey the individuation path in mythic form. In relationships, though, the hero can turn compulsive, drawn to partners who need saving, addicted to crisis. The hero's red flag is exhaustion disguised as purpose. Their growth edge is to realize that love isn't another mountain to climb, it's a space to rest in truth. The maiden, in contrast, symbolizes innocence, openness, and newness. Her danger is idealization, mistaking fascination for love, surrender for depth. When the maiden archetype rules, we seek magic instead of mutuality. The growth edge here is maturity, to integrate wonder with discernment and to love not because something feels new, but because it's real. Together, the hero and maiden often reenact the fantasy of rescue, each longing for wholeness in the other. Yet Jung warned that the soul demands completion, not salvation. The real rescue happens when both awaken from the myth and realize they were each chasing a lost part of themselves. These are the archetypes of sovereignty, of self-worth, dignity, and presence. The king archetype is mature order, the queen archetype is mature radiance. When they are unconscious, they become the tyrant and the pleaser. The king in shadow commands loyalty but fears vulnerability. He mistakes control for leadership. The queen in shadow seeks validation rather than reverence. She mistakes attention for love. Their red flag as a pair is transactional affection, love as exchange. Their growth edge is authentic power. The ability to give without losing the self, to receive without manipulation. A relationship between two conscious sovereigns is rare, Jung might say, because most people are still subjects to their own unconscious kingdoms. Integration here means learning to govern oneself before trying to rule with another. And then there's the trickster Jung's favorite paradox. The trickster breaks patterns by exaggerating them. It's the archetype that makes you send the text, you shouldn't start the argument you swore you'd avoid, or chase the unavailable person just one more time. The trickster doesn't want to ruin you, it wants to wake you up. In mythology, the trickster destroys false order so something new can emerge. Its red flag is chaos without consciousness. Its gift is freedom from rigidity. When you recognize the trickster's presence, laugh not with cruelty, but with awareness. Jung called humor the most divine weapon against despair. Sometimes laughter is the moment the spell breaks. Each archetype has its light and shadow. The work is not to exile any of them, but to let them coexist without domination. Jung wrote, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the opposites." The more you can identify which archetype is active in your conflict, the mother who fears abandonment, the hero who can't stop saving, the trickster who stirs chaos just to feel alive, the closer you move toward consciousness. And consciousness, Jung would insist, is love's truest form. Once you've met the archetypes, the next step is to see where they live through you. Jung warned, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That line is deceptively simple, because in it lies the entire bridge between projection and ownership. Projection begins whenever we use someone else as a screen for our disowned feelings. The psyche does this automatically. If I've never allowed myself to feel anger, I'll keep finding people who are too aggressive. If I've buried my own longing for intimacy, I'll be drawn to people who are too needy. The outer conflict mirrors the inner split. What we call incompatibility is often just unconscious resonance. Jung wrote that the projection of the anima and animus creates the illusion of love at first sight. It's not really the other person we fall for, it's our own unlived potential reflected in their eyes. But the same mirror that seduces us also exposes us. Every accusation, "You always leave, you never listen, you make me feel small," is a coded message from the unconscious. If you reframe each of these sentences with the stem, "When I say you always, what I really fear is," you'll uncover the hidden subject. For example, "You always control everything" might become, "I fear losing my autonomy." "You never care enough" becomes, "I fear being unworthy of care." "You make me feel invisible" translates to, "I still haven't learned how to see myself." This simple translation turns projection into dialogue. You stop speaking at the other and start speaking with your own soul. Jung believed that this moment when you withdraw a projection is one of the most difficult acts in psychology, because it means accepting responsibility for your own shadow. It means recognizing that the person who wounded you may also have been your teacher in disguise. To make this real, Jung would say, slow down the moment of reaction. Before you fire the next defensive sentence, pause for 90 seconds. Feel the archetype rising. Is it the mother trying to rescue again? The hero rushing to fix? The trickster stirring chaos just to feel alive? Naming the archetype interrupts the trance. The act of naming, Jung said, is the beginning of consciousness. In that pause, you re-establish sovereignty. You move from being possessed by the archetype to partnering with it. The moment you say, the rescuer in me wants to take over, you're no longer trapped in compulsion, you're aware. Awareness doesn't erase the impulse, but it changes its power. What was automatic becomes optional. Ownership doesn't mean blame, it means integration. When you claim the qualities you once projected, the world becomes less hostile because you're no longer fighting your own reflection. The person who once triggered you now becomes a mirror of growth. Jung said, we meet our destiny on the path we take to avoid it. Every conflict you've tried to escape was an invitation to maturity. And so the practice is simple but revolutionary. Translate accusation into insight, reaction into reflection, and pattern into prayer. Ask what part of me is asking to be seen through this person. When that question becomes your default, projection begins to dissolve and love for perhaps the first time becomes conscious. At the center of Jung's psychology lies one of his most mysterious ideas, the inner marriage. He called it conjunctio, the sacred union of opposites within the psyche. In ancient alchemy, it was symbolized by the sun and moon embracing the union of fire and water, spirit and soul. In modern terms, it's when your inner masculine and feminine energies, your anima and animus, finally stop fighting and start conversing. Most of our relationship suffering comes from this split. The part of us that acts can't rest. The part that feels can't decide. The inner masculine fears surrender. The inner feminine fears abandonment. And because they can't meet within, we search for someone else to complete the circuit. We fall in love with our missing half, not realizing it was ours to begin with. Jung wrote, the meeting of the anima and animus within a person is the true marriage. This inner union doesn't mean perfection, it means dialogue. When your masculine side, clarity, logic, structure, can listen to your feminine side, intuition, emotion, receptivity, you stop projecting those polarities outward. You no longer need someone else to bring balance. You become balance. Think of how these forces operate in daily life. The anima inspires imagination, empathy, and creative flow, but without the animus, her dreams never take form. The animus brings focus, action, and direction, but without the anima, his actions lose meaning. Integration is when the dreamer learns discipline and the doer learns tenderness. Creativity finds structure. Clarity makes space for beauty. Jung might say this is when psyche becomes symphony. So how do we begin this inner marriage? Start with awareness. Notice which energy dominates. Are you always doing, solving, fixing? That's an overextended animus. Do you wait, hope, and overfeel without acting? That's an inflated anima. Neither is wrong. They are simply lonely without the other. The task isn't suppression, it's reconciliation. You can whisper inwardly, I see you both. You both belong. This moment of recognition is transformative. Jung once noted, the union of opposites is the source of all creation. When your inner poles stop pulling against each other, energy that was spent on tension becomes available for presence. You begin to make choices not from need, but from wholeness. The partner you attract now doesn't fill your void, they meet your fullness. That's why Jung insisted that individuation, the process of becoming whole, is the true foundation of love. Without it, relationships are just two incomplete halves trying to merge. With it, love becomes the meeting of two inner marriages, a partnership between equals, each sovereign in their own soul. When you integrate your inner opposites, boundaries become organic. You no longer need to defend or prove. You simply are. Jung said, only the person who is inwardly free can afford to be related. This freedom is not detachment, it's self-possession. And only those who are self-possessed can love without fear of loss. Because the truth is simple. Until the inner marriage takes place, every outer relationship remains a rehearsal. Once it happens, every connection, even fleeting, becomes an expression of the same union within. Once the inner marriage begins, once your anima and animus learn to speak instead of fight, you gain something rare in human life, clarity without cruelty. This is the soil where boundaries grow. Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Boundaries are simply the outer expression of that acceptance, the lines drawn not to keep love out, but to keep the self intact within love. Most people imagine boundaries as walls. In truth, they are membranes, living edges that let in what nourishes and filter out what harms. They are not built from anger, they are sculpted from awareness. You can only draw them when you know what's yours and what isn't. And that clarity only comes after the inner opposites begin to unite, when your inner feminine knows her worth and your inner masculine has learned to protect, not control it. Archetypes express their boundaries differently. The queen, for instance, doesn't beg to be respected, she assumes it, and her calm certainty teaches others how to treat her. Her red flag is resentment disguised as grace. Her growth edge is to say no before her silence turns bitter. The king, in his healthy form, creates order without domination. His shadow builds empires of fear. His growth is to rule with presence, not pride. Then there's the hero, who thinks love is proven through endurance. His weak boundary is overextension, saying yes until he collapses. His task is to learn that compassion without containment becomes martyrdom. And the trickster, that restless shapeshifter, tests every limit just to see if it's real. His gift, when integrated, is freedom, the reminder that even boundaries can breathe. Ask yourself, when conflict arises, which archetype steps forward first? The overgiving mother? The dismissive father? The impatient hero? Naming that voice reveals the energy shaping your limits. Then ask, what would the mature version of this archetype do? The mother can still nurture, but she can also say, I need rest. The father can still lead, but he can also say, I don't know. The hero can still help, but not at the cost of his peace. Jung believed that every act of individuation required a boundary, a sacred line drawn in the sand of the soul. Without boundaries, the self is swallowed by the collective. With them, the self becomes distinct enough to relate. This paradox is key. True intimacy requires separation. Two whole selves meeting, not fusing, not fixing, simply seeing. So, when you feel that pull to overextend, pause and ask, is this love or is this fear of losing love? Boundaries drawn from love protect connection. Boundaries drawn from fear protect illusion. The queen sets the former, the wounded child sets the latter. Your new task is to design your own boundary architecture, not rigid fences, but clear forms. Speak it aloud, write it down, live it quietly. The goal isn't to have perfect control over others, but to cultivate enough self-respect that chaos can't seduce you anymore. And when your boundaries hold, something beautiful happens. You no longer need to test others to know they care. You can finally let love flow freely because your edges are strong enough to contain it. Next section, repair after rupture cat. Zero, teaching how to restore connection after conflict using conscious language. What I did was, what I'll try next time, and how to ritualize recommitment without fusion. Would you like me to continue with that section next? Bạn đã nói, yes. ChatGPT đã nói, tone, note. Continue the same emotionally intelligent, psychologically grounded flow, calm, deeply human, and restorative. This section should model conscious repair, how self-aware individuals transform conflict into intimacy. Keep it anchored in Jungian principles of shadow work and individuation, but make the emotional language tangible and lived. Repair after rupture. Even the most self-aware relationships will break. Integration doesn't make you flawless, it makes you responsible. Jung said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Every rupture then is an initiation, a call to transform pain into understanding, to turn reaction into relationship. When conflict erupts, our archetypes return to their primal instincts. The hero defends, the victim retreats, the trickster mocks, the mother over-explains, the father judges. What begins as a conversation quickly becomes a mythic battle between inner gods, each demanding to be right. But behind every defensive sentence is a simple wound saying, I want to be seen. Repair begins when you slow the story down enough to hear that. Use this 3-line ritual not as a script, but as a doorway. What I wanted was, this brings your need into light. Beneath anger, there's always longing. To be heard, valued, safe, desired. Naming it stops the shadow from speaking through accusation. What I did was, this is humility. You name your own contribution to the conflict without collapsing into guilt. Ownership is not punishment, it's sovereignty. What I'll try next time. This is integration. You imagine a future moment of awareness, not perfection, but choice. Together, these 3 lines rebuild trust because they replace blame with authorship. Jung believed that the shadow is most dangerous when it is unseen. The moment you name your shadow aloud, its power shifts from destruction to intimacy. After you've spoken these sentences, pause. Don't rush back into harmony. Sit in the quiet that follows the awkward silence where the psyche is still adjusting. This is the alchemical chamber of relationship, the point where ego loosens and the soul begins to breathe again. Jung wrote, the meeting of 2 personalities is like the contact of 2 chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Repair is that reaction made conscious. And then comes the recommitment not to the fusion that once felt safe, but to the connection that now feels real. You can mark it with a small ritual, a touch, a phrase, even a breath shared in awareness, something that says we see each other again. Because true repair isn't about returning to how things were, it's about returning to the relationship as it's becoming. You both emerge changed, less innocent but more whole. The illusion of perfection dies, and in its place arises something Jung might call eros with roots love, that has touched shadow and chosen to stay. Every rupture, when faced consciously, deepens the vessel that holds the relationship. Every apology spoken in truth widens the heart's capacity to include contradiction. And every act of repair teaches the psyche that connection and freedom can coexist, that you don't have to disappear to stay close. Let's bring all of this into one living example, a story that could belong to anyone. We'll call her Elena. For years, she's fallen for the same kind of partner, charismatic, passionate, and subtly unavailable. Every time the relationship starts, like lightning, intensity, connection, shared dreams. But then the familiar script unfolds. He withdraws, she pursues. He shuts down, she explains, until finally she feels small again, unseen, exhausted, and ashamed for caring too much. Why do I keep doing this? She asks. I thought I'd healed. Jung would tell Elena that the psyche repeats what it hasn't yet integrated. So we begin there not with blame, but with curiosity. In her journal, Elena writes out the last 3 conflicts she's had. She notices a pattern. I always feel like I'm the only one trying. That phrase becomes the keyhole to her myth. When we trace it back, we find a childhood image, a father who loved her but was distant, a mother who managed everything. The archetypes begin to surface. The heroine who saves connection and the child who fears abandonment. These two have been dancing for decades. Each new partner simply wears their faces. In her next relationship, the same dynamic appears. He grows quiet after an argument. She feels panic rising. But this time she pauses just long enough to ask, "Who's speaking right now?" She realizes it's her inner heroine. Rushing in to rescue the child from rejection, she feels the ache beneath the impulse. "I don't want to lose love again." That recognition changes everything. Instead of sending a pleading message, she writes in her notebook, "When I say you don't care, what I really fear is that I don't matter." It's the sentence stem we practiced earlier, turning projection into ownership. She breathes, names the archetype, and waits. The emotional wave subsides. Later, when they talk, she uses the 3-line ritual. "What I wanted was to feel connected. What I did was pressure you to respond. What I'll try next time is to share the fear, not the accusation." Her partner softens. For the first time, they talk about the pattern, not inside it. This is what Jung meant by the birth of consciousness through relationship. A moment ago, they were two archetypes colliding, the heroine and the withdrawn king. Now they are two humans meeting. Over the next weeks, Elena begins to practice what Jung called active imagination, an inner dialogue between her archetypal parts. She sits quietly and asks the heroine, "What are you afraid will happen if you stop rescuing?" The heroine replies, "She'll disappear." Then she turns to the child and says, "You're safe. You don't need saving anymore." That inner conversation becomes the real repair, the inner marriage in motion. Months later, Elena notices something subtle. The people she's drawn to have changed. They're calmer, less dramatic, more consistent. That's no coincidence. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." When Elena stopped chasing her projection, her psyche stopped demanding its repetition. She didn't attract better, she became the person who no longer needed chaos to feel alive. This is the alchemy of awareness. The same pattern seen consciously becomes initiation instead of suffering. The relationship didn't fix her, it revealed her. And that's the point of all of this, to move from reacting to reality to relating with it. You've just traveled through the hidden architecture of your relationships, from projection to awareness, from archetype to ownership. And maybe you've already noticed something shifting, not in your partner, not in your past, but in the way you see. Jung said the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Awareness is that privilege. It's what turns suffering into meaning and meaning into freedom. Now the question becomes, how do we keep it alive? Insight fades without ritual, so we anchor it in practice. Over the next 14 days, keep a pattern log. Each time you feel emotionally triggered, hurt, angry, unseen, afraid, pause and write 3 things. What happened externally? What emotion arose internally? Which archetype was activated? After a week, you'll begin to notice repetition, not to shame yourself, but to witness how the psyche speaks in patterns. The goal isn't to stop the pattern, but to see it before it takes over. Seeing is the transformation. Then choose one inner marriage action, a small gesture that reunites your opposites. If your animus tends to control, let your anima choose a creative act with no outcome. If your anima tends to wait passively, let your animus make one decisive move. Balance comes through behavior. Each time you honor both energies, the line between inner and outer love begins to blur. And finally, remember, every person who enters your life mirrors something sacred within you. Jung often said that meeting the self is the adventure of a lifetime. So the next time someone appears at just the right or wrong moment, don't rush to label it coincidence or fate. Ask instead, What part of me is arriving through this encounter? Because synchronicity, those strange timed meetings that feel like destiny, isn't random. It's the psyche speaking in events. In our next exploration, we'll look at that directly. How relationships, timing, and coincidence weave together in what Jung called the acausal connecting principle. Or simply put, how love sometimes seems to find us at the exact moment we're ready to meet ourselves. Until then, stay curious. Watch your patterns with tenderness. Because the point of all this isn't to fix your love life, it's to make it conscious.